I also look at this from Dubas's perspective, and unless you are dead set, like you think you can win a Stanley Cup in the next couple years with Sidney Crosby and the rest of this core, would you want the Penguins, and not just Dubas, anybody, any GM, anywhere, would you want to come to the Penguins in their current state? And that's a genuine question, because I look at it from you just missed the postseason. The team is old. You have an aging core, which is still playing at a high level, but they are aging. You have a lot of bad contracts. You have 8 no movement clauses, and you have nothing in terms of a farm system. So would you really want to take this over? And of course, a lot of guys are very competitive, and they probably like the challenge, and they'd probably see what they could happen if they were the GM. But it's not like the Penguins, outside of that, it's that organization, and you get to be the GM with that player or those players. I don't view it as that attractive as a job on the outside looking in, because of all the skeletons in that closet right now.
I don't know if it's because of being a Penguins fan and obviously having that bias within the fandom, or what, but I almost view it as, kind of the best of both worlds, where you're going to be able to compete right now. You think, I know they didn't make the playoffs this year, but I feel like they have a good enough roster that they could next season, given and I say good enough roster, meaning the Stars playing the way that they were this year. There's obviously still a ton of holes for this GM to plug away in year one, basically immediately needing to step in and do so. But also, like you said, I think that, a lot of guys look at it and want that challenge, like want to see what they can rebuild, have a vision, a long-term plan in place. So let's finish out the career of these 3, icons in Pittsburgh and see what we can do with that. And then the new challenge begins of rebuilding this thing to try to get back to that point. And also going to be paid pretty well in the process of doing so, with FSG running things. So I don't think that hurts also when you look at the ownership group that's above the GM. I would say, so my answer would be, in general, like if you're talking about league wide, looking at all the potential GM spots, it's probably middle of the pack, but at the same time, it's like one of 32 possible anyway, and how many are open.
Yeah.
Like for Dubas specifically, it's been talked about Pittsburgh. I know, like, I don't even know if it's a rumor or if it's just the fans trying to get it to happen. Ottawa being talked about as well. But for him, like, again, I think it's kind of like, for the now, you have the situation that you do, trying to squeeze everything out of this core as possible. And then, the challenge of what is likely going to not be a short turnaround. And you have to kind of have that voted confidence from ownership that you're going to have a long leash to try to turn it around. That seems like a fun, and I'm putting that like in air quotes, project for a guy that has that long-term vision. And he's a young dude, so he can be around.
He's only 37. Yeah. I looked it up because after we heard about
32.
Yeah, after we heard about the Crosby conversation, because I wanted to know, like, how close are they in age? And Crosby is going to be 36 this year. Yeah, 36. And Dubas is 37.
Why?
Not sure if he's turning 38. But they're super close in age, which is really weird, just thinking about a GM that young. But, and maybe this is very, I don't know if ignorant is the right word. I just don't know a lot about all the other GM openings enough, because I'm not a fan of that team. But I feel like the Penguins, more so than other openings, could be. I view the spot as very high risk, high reward as a GM, because I look at what Ron Hextall inherited, and it was very much a high risk, high rewards situation, where we have the tools, or we have the players, and we have the cash to be able to be the high reward team and get you to that Stanley Cup. But there's also the high risk aspect of it, and we saw that with Ron Hextall this past season, where if you do too much or you screw it up, then you're going to be gone. And I feel like that's how I would view the Penguin spot right now, with Dubas or anyone else. I think it's a high risk, high reward situation. High risk of you're coming in and you have to, one, try to win still with the players that you have, because you still have this core playing at such a high level that you need to. And also you have to rebuild the farm system where they have like 2 prospects worth a damn thing. But after that, I think that Dubas is up for the job, and I think that it'd be really cool to see him in Pittsburgh. I like a lot of what he did with Toronto. Obviously, no GM's perfect. If you look at their entire tenure, there's going to be signings, there's going to be trades where you question it wherever any GM is from. No GM hits 100%, but I think that he did a lot of good things at Toronto. It would excite me to have somebody like that in Pittsburgh. And I think that Dubas is an aggressive GM, which is something that I like, but I also think he's a smart GM. So I think there is a good balance of that. Of you kind of get like the best of both worlds, where he's into the analytics and he's into the young players and building up prospects. Because I think the Toronto Marlies, you saw some good prospects from them, and saw some good drafts from Dubas, but also you were able to be aggressive. I mean, they went after and they got John Tavares, for freaking sake. I mean, they were able to keep and sign, whether the people like the contracts or not. They did the impossible in signing not only John Tavares to that what was that, 8-figure contract? Because 7 figures is million. Yeah, 8-figure contract, but also Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner. So I feel like it would be a really good and fun GM tenure in Pittsburgh. Hopefully fun. Honestly, I don't know if we thought the Ron Hextall tenure could be fun. We were just hoping it wouldn't be as bad as it was. But no, I think it just seems like it's Dubas until it's not now. Which, if you asked me just last week on our show, I didn't think Dubas was going to come to Pittsburgh. It just seemed like it was written off at that point. But now it just seems like it is Dubas until it's not. And I think it's really interesting that he was in Pittsburgh for that long, and hopefully his wife likes fries on her salads, because I feel like that could be the only thing holding it up.
It was Dubas who you've wanted all along, because I think a lot of people, whether it's just name recognition or, I mean, you look at the roster that Toronto consistently had, it's as good of a roster around the NHL. They obviously couldn't get over the hump there, but I don't know that you can blame that on the roster construction. Like, the roster was in place, and that's Dubas's job. So was Dubas the guy that you've kind of wanted all along if he were available, or, where were you at with
if he was available, I would say Dubas would probably be at the top of my board. And I mainly look at what Toronto was able to do with cap flexibility and to able to maneuver the cap the way they did, to be able to dress the rosters that they did, as well as some of the moves that he made. I just think he was a really good GM, and it's going to be one that is not going to be I feel like remembered enough in Toronto, just because they didn't get over that hump, and so that's going to be a knock on him forever in Toronto. But outside of not getting over the hump, I mean, they did this year. They got past the first round, but then they got knocked out. But if you look at just the rosters that he had in those several years, you look at those and it's like, how did these teams not get over the hump? Well, they play the Washington Capitals in 2018 when the Caps won the Cup. They play the Boston Bruins. They play the Tampa Bay Lightning. Like, they were going against really good teams, and I don't think it's fair to hold Dubas against that the entire way. I think that just matchups as well are part of the reason that they never got over that point. But yeah, just from looking at it, I think I want somebody that is able to build a roster like that and build a very aggressive roster while also being smart with your cap. Because I just think having 3 contracts over $10 million on that team and still being able to field or ice a team that is very competent offensively and is structured in a way that you're not like flirting with a really bad line at all times, because that's something that a team like that you would feel like they have, is a really bad bottom 6, kind of like what the Penguins had last year. And the Penguins don't have anywhere near those top contracts that Toronto did. So I think that, yeah, from that standpoint, I would love to have him as the GM, and he would have been my top spot if he was available. I just didn't think he would be available, and I didn't know how much interest he'd actually have in Pittsburgh, assuming that he could have stayed in Toronto. Obviously that didn't work out, but then that opened the door completely.
I mean, I think he's much better than Ron Hextall. That goes without saying, but it is funny that, like, maybe the biggest knock on Dubas in his tenure has been finding a goalie. Like, and that's what we're talking about
Yeah.
in Pittsburgh right now, and probably one of the bigger knocks when you look at Hextall as well in his tenure. Obviously, bunch of different things for him, but yeah, that's the big one for me. Looking at Dubas's time in Toronto is just not being able to find that goalie. For me, I wanted Tolsky, the assistant GM in Carolina. He was kind of my number one, and Dubas and kind of everybody else kind of like once we got past that first round of interviews where we got rid of those like old time hockey retreads that were
Mark
just getting,
Bergevin.
yeah, Peter Chiarelli's, like the guys that were just getting interviews as like a courtesy, basically. Once we got past that group and it was like Tolsky, Darsh, Greeley, obviously now Dubas, McKinnon, like any of those guys, I would have been fine with. Tolsky was my number one, pretty much everybody else at number two. At this point, with it seeming like the team is zeroed in on Dubas, I'm all in. Like, that's clearly, if it ends up not being Kyle Dubas, it's because of Kyle Dubas, and they ended up settling for their second option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. And when that does happen, when he does sign in Pittsburgh, I want everybody to know now that the Penguin meme, because the Squidward Steeler thing.
Penguin,
yeah, I made that. I made that with him yelling and Penguin. So yeah. I had to call out.
I've seen Clark. It a few times.
Yeah, I had to call out Clark about it. Where's the credit? But yeah, no, I made that. Okay, your boy can make memes too. Okay,